Okay, you're all set.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, December 10th, 2024 meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee on Zoom only. I'm going to read our little speech beforehand, and then we'll get going. This meeting is being audio and video recorded. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you, and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all devices and phones. For items with public comment, after committee members have finished their discussion on an agenda item, the chair will afford members of the public up to 3 minutes to speak. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their name and any affiliations. To give public comment, you must be recognized by the chair and speak through the chair. There is to be no crosstalk with others in attendance. In the interest of the efficient use of our time, please speak through the chair. Please, let's see. To be recognized for making a public comment, use the raise hand feature by clicking on the reactions tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then click on the raised hand button. When you finished your comment, please click the lower hand button. It's important for me to note that TRAC isn't required by law to take public comment. We do so because we need your invaluable input. We view public comment as a privilege, so please remain respectful in your comments and do not disparage other speakers or the members of this committee. Okay. I call the meeting to order. Okay. Number 3, public comment. We will take public comment on items that are
Peter?
not on the, what?
Just roll call for who's here.
Okay. I'm in such a hurry. Okay, board members, committee members. Start with Sarah Boyce.
She's on mute.
Here, sorry.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
Tim Brain.
Here.
Doug Rose.
Here.
Gary Beller.
Here.
Matt Fee.
Here.
Joanna Roach.
Here.
And our newest member, Dave Iverson.
Here.
Okay. Staff, we have Leah Hill
Here.
and Vince Murphy.
He's not at his computer right now.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so now I'll take public comment on items not on the agenda. Is there any public comment? Okay, hearing none. Approval of the minutes, October 22, 2024.
I'll move
I'll
approve.
take, okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second. All right, roll call vote. Sarah Boyce. Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Tim Brain.
Aye.
Doug Rose.
Aye.
Gary Beller.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Joanna Roach.
Aye.
Christy Kickham.
I'm sorry, I just joined, so I'm not sure what you're voting on.
We're voting on the October 22nd minutes.
Abstain.
Okay, and I am assuming, Dave, you'll be abstaining.
Yes.
Okay, chair votes aye. Okay. So is this me or you? I guess it's me. I'd like to introduce the newest Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee member as the Planning Board Representative, Dave Iverson. Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Thank you.
You're in for a hell of a ride.
Little overwhelmed, but I'll get up to speed at some point.
Yeah, I think you'll find we're a little bit mellower than your current board. Okay, discussion on potential funding mechanisms for coastal resilience projects with town council.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen of the list. Okay, there you go, John.
Thank you. So I actually do have a question. Peter, are we talking strictly about capital projects here? I assume that's the case. As opposed to day-to-day operational kinds of things. Does CRAC get involved in the day-to-day work, or is it really focusing on capital projects?
Well, I would say capital projects, and to the extent of day-to-day work, you know, we would be involved if there was something, if there was a department in town that had a day-to-day thing that we needed to be involved in, but not really day-to-day. I'd say capital projects, since there are 40 recommendations in the coastal resilience plan
Right.
that involve capital projects, it'd be more capital projects. Am I
Okay.
correct, Leah?
Yes, it would be focused on capital projects. So
Okay.
mostly those structural projects that, you know, cost millions of dollars to implement.
Right. And Leah, would those and you know, if you don't know, that's fine, but are we assuming that most of those projects would go to, unless there's a grant, would go to town meeting for a bond authorization and a Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion question? Or have you thought that far ahead?
I think that, well, I don't know the ins and outs of the bond exclusion and
Yep.
all of that. So maybe you can explain that to the committee. But I think that, yeah, the town should be prepared to bring these
Okay.
if there's no grants available, to bring the projects to town meeting to be funded.
Okay, so, you know, I'm gonna guess you will be getting grants here. They, whether they're federal and state coastal resiliency grants, they generally require a local contribution. And also most of the grants are what are called reimbursement grants, which means that the town has to appropriate the money, identify a funding source, and then as the town conducts the work, you submit grant reimbursement requests on basically a pay-as-you-go basis, but you have to appropriate the money up front. There are some grants that are not reimbursement grants. They're just a direct allocation of funds to the town. And those can be expended, grants can be expended without an appropriation of vote at town meeting. It requires approval by the select board, however, but that is certainly an available option in many circumstances. So we'll really have to look at this on a project by project basis. If the town is getting a grant, you're in good shape, but you either have to borrow in anticipation of a grant or you need to appropriate the money up front. I see a couple of hands raised.
Okay, Joanna, you have a question?
Yes, and just a couple of comments. So what John is talking about, I just think that we should all have the same understanding of what happens with the money. So when we have the conversation, we're all talking about the same thing. So far, we voted at town meeting to put $1 million aside a year for coastal resiliency. So that money is, let's just call it for the purposes of the conversation, in a savings account for us to use. That
Joanna,
yes.
may I ask a question about that?
Yes, yes.
Was
Yes.
that a raise and appropriate contingent on an override?
Is the $1 million on a
Yes, was that
contingency? Not that I know of. I thought that my understanding is we're setting aside $1 million a year for coastal resiliency projects.
well, I would need to know more about the mechanism, how that was actually done.
I can
I'm
answer
sure we
that.
can, I mean, Vince can
anybody
probably
answer
answer
that
that
question?
question. I think
Hold on,
Vince can.
excuse me, everybody, through the chair, please.
Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
who can answer that question? And then I'll go back to you, Joanna. Vince,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
Thank you, Peter. So just as the Coastal Resilience Plan was being concluded, town administration sought to put, at the time, I think it was $1.5 million a year for the first year. I think it initially came from, I hate the term, but it's the term that gets used, free cash. Then every year after that, it was an Article 10 regular appropriation. It wasn't any kind of 2.5 override. It was just a regular one, just like most other, how should I say this, mid-level, small and mid-level capital projects through Article 10. And then I think, roughly speaking, so far the money has been overseen by the town administration. Anyone wishing to spend from that fund needed to go through admin. So it is not specifically for the use of Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee or the Natural Resources Department. That needs to be abundantly clear.
So if I may, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
so if there was an article to appropriate $1.5 million in free cash, that's a separate article, and I don't know whether all of those funds have been expended or whether there's a balance left, but those likely can continue to be expended by town administration and basically until you've exhausted the appropriation. If you include funding in Article 10, which I believe is the general operating budget for the town, if that money is not spent at the end of the year, it essentially will devolve to free cash the next year. So that's not a continuing revenue source beyond the fiscal year in which it was appropriated, if that makes sense.
Yes. Joanna, did you want to finish?
Yes, so I still think there needs to be a little bit more clarification around that answer to that question. I don't know if either Christy or Matt has a different perspective, but I'll continue on with what I was going to say, which is that in my mind, the $1 million that we're setting aside annually would be the money that would be for any type of matching funds grants that we would apply for. And yes, the appropriation for any type of pre-spending has to happen in the year before his budget. But what I was really going to say is that in order for that to even happen, we need to make sure that we have money in the budget, continued money in the budget for having a grant writer and managing the projects. And that is a really critical element of what we're discussing right now. Other than that, I think John's explanation about funding the capital projects through debt exclusion and Proposition 2.5 overrides, I think is likely how any of these larger projects would get funded. I would caution our entire group that the ability for us to find federal and state grants and win them is an extremely competitive process through which we have had some small successes, but the efforts of this are great in magnitude, right? And we should, in terms of what we're doing for funding, looking at how we're funding these mechanisms, multiple of these things on the list need to fire at the same time, right? We have a huge amount of projects to fund. And in terms of the way that this group has already addressed the prioritization of these projects, we need to assign values to each of these funding mechanisms and understand the type of money we can get from each of these areas. Because, for example, and I'm just going to use Washington Street or Easy Street, either one as an example, if we think that we're going to get funding from a federal grant to do either of those projects, then the actuality of those projects being implemented, we are 5 to 7 years away from that, right? And because of how we're also discussing this, and I wish I had thought about this in advance and asked you to do this, Peter, we should have invited somebody from the Steamship Authority to sit in on some of these meetings regarding funding, because until the Steamship Authority really has a plan for what they're doing, there's like a domino effect of how we're going to orchestrate what we're doing next. And so these questions are great, and I think they're super important. But as we work through the list, coming up with goals for how much or targets for how much each of these individual things can raise will help us realize, I think, the pot of potential funding so that we can strategize and make good recommendations around budgeting time, which, by the way, we're in right now, right? So if we're going to make a main focus of getting grants, then we need to make sure that in that, FY26 budget, the money for the grant writers there, the money for the administration is there, and that we have this million or 2 million, it would be as we come around to the next year, to do appropriate matching or to even vote on appropriating those funds. Does that all make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Okay, thanks.
So, all right, thank you. Go ahead, Matt.
No, I was going to say some of the things that Joanna said. This is a ton of money that we have to raise. Some of our list of potential mechanisms is some of them are unrealistic or already spoken for other things. I think expecting us to do this every other week is not going to work. This needs to be driven by staff and come from staff, from planning and finance and Vince. And I know they're doing this, so this isn't a, I think this isn't a criticism, but I think it needs to be driven up from staff because they're going to be the ones charged with doing it, and they'll pick the things, they can help us pick the things that will be most successful. I think one of the things that I just keep going back to is really a policy issue that, we are not setting policy, we're advisory, but I think the policy issue, are we using value capture or not? Are we asking those that a benefit to pay and to pay commensurate with their benefit? Or are we not doing that? That was a huge issue with the sewer funding because people wanted the taxpayers to pay for their benefit. And, I believe that we need to do it. I think we should be doing betterments at Sconset already. The money will go further and it's economically more efficient. Your decision making is more efficient if you, put some of the charge where it belongs, and, and we'll get more projects done. And so I think that is what I think we should be looking at the big picture and recommending the big picture, and then allowing staff to implement that big picture is sort of how I've looked at it. So I think we sometimes get down in the weeds and then we spend the whole time down in the weeds. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Go ahead, Christie.
Yeah, just from the capital committee sort of point of view, maybe, and for John, I guess, when capital committee gives its advisement to the finance committee and the board of selectmen on the capital requests that we get, we never really, we leave all the financing options up to the finance department. We don't really chime in on whether it's an override or say free cash. That comes later. But I think what the committee is trying to do here is, considering the significant, future costs of coastal resiliency projects, we're trying to come up with other ways to fund, capital projects, department projects, as we move forward, aside from, what capital project funding normally is. So I think that's what sort of this list is picking up on.
Okay, thank you, Christie. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I think this is a great list to start, and it's a list of potential funding options that we can do. Obviously, as stated before, some of these are more either controversial or need to be voted on. But I want to kind of take a step back because I think there's two things I'm thinking of a lot. One is it's really project specific. And so having the list, it's easier to be like, okay, well, what kind of project are we talking about? And what are the funding options? So like to Matt's point, something that is really benefiting a small area, betterments or something that's more, benefit based is maybe more appropriate. But I think the other thing to think about is like, what are the goals for having that backup fund, as Joanna was saying. Like if we're writing grants for a big, like if a big project comes up, or we have a plan for a big project in the next 5 years, and we know it's going to be a certain amount of money, and we're going to be, and I say we, like the town, is going to be applying for some of these really large state or federal grants. What is that emergency fund or backup fund, or, you know, that the money in the bank, as it were, that we want to have on hand? Because now is the time to start planning for which one is actually going to accomplish those goals. Is it going to be the, you know, I could see, you know, the beach sticker funds might be an easier get through, but like how much money are you actually going to get from that? If we're talking like we need $10 million to have on hand, I'm just throwing out random numbers just to think about, then that changes the goals of which of these are going to accomplish that. So I'm not a financial expert, but I think about the options really depend on what we're talking, like what project, what type of timeline we're planning for. And I know that, you know, in the grand scheme of the Coastal Resilience Plan, we're like, it's going to be $1 bazillion to do all of these projects. So I think that if we're being charged as the CRAC committee, which is an advisory committee, to make these recommendations, I think we need to have a lot more financial planning in sense of like, okay, we need $10 million by 2030, or I don't, you know, I'm just, once again, these are just random numbers, but that would be helpful. Otherwise, I think us making this list is helpful, but then putting that, as you know, Matt was saying, to the staff to be like, okay, for these things, we need this. I think for this group's expertise, it's like, these are things that we've seen other communities do. These are helpful and these are our options, but it really depends on the project. So there's that piece I wanted to say. The only other thing with this list too is like, somebody's sharing their screen. Thanks. I think on this list, I don't think that we're all in agreement that these are options we want to do. I am personally very much against selling sand when we can use those for other things. So I'm not sure like what the priorities on this list are if we want to organize that differently. I think there has been really great success seen in the public-private partnerships. And anyway, so I think there's, you know, aside from what I already said too, I think, what are we talking about today in terms of this list? Are we organizing it? Are we saying for certain projects, or are we just having a discussion about what's legal and possible?
All right, thanks, Sarah. And before you go, Vince, I just want to put this question out there that hopefully you or John or one of our financial members can answer. We get our $1 million a year, but it sounds like it can then go into free cash. And is that free cash for anybody? Oh, we have all these ideas here for raising funds to pay for projects. Can't we just keep the money when we get it, so we have it to use it when we need it, as opposed to risking losing it as it goes around the orbit of the year, and okay, now it's in free cash, now someone else can take it. I would think that it'd be a priority that we have an account that the money is in there and it grows, so that as the cost of doing things over time, the cost of construction over time, we can have the money there when we need it. I know this is a very base question, but I'm not, like Sarah, a financial person at all, but I want to understand that when we need the money 5 to 7 years from now, when a project can be done, it's going to be there. Okay, that's my question. Go ahead, Vince.
Thank you, Peter. John is correct. It could return to the general fund. To date, it has not. It has been set aside as a coastal resilience fund, and we've drawn down from it year to year. We haven't spent all of it every year, but we still have a pretty good war chest for the sake of argument. It's been said a number of times, but let's just say it so that we're 100% sure. It is an excellent matching fund. It is an excellent fund for project initiation, for source funding for things. We've used it for a multitude of different things, all small scale, all starter type things. For the sake of argument, it was used as the matching fund source for the project that Leah is doing on Easy Street for that section of the downtown neighborhood flood barrier. It was, 470,000 and change funded from the state, but the town had to put up a percentage too. So that's where the money came from. when we looked at doing stuff for the Washington Street area, the place that floods third fastest above anywhere else in town, and we're working with the land bank. We needed to have a fund for that, and that's what it's for. We've also done a number of other little things with it through time, so it is getting used, but we're not misappropriating it. We have to go through town admin to get them to release the funds under approval each time. And if it's a project, then it has to also get approved by select board. So we're doing a heck of a lot with it. We're using it as a force multiplier, and it has been doing terrifically well for that, and more power to it. So I just need to make one thing clear. We have to understand that Leah and I are only humans. We haven't gotten our superhuman capabilities just yet. There's two of us. That's it. So if you want grant writers and you want us to be applying for this, that, and the next thing, wrong question. I'm sorry, but a fact is a fact. Until we have more staff that can implement, then grant writers are useless. I am sorry, but that is just the way it is. It doesn't matter if they write grants across departments or just for coastal resilience, until you have some more staff to be able to undertake the work, or you have contractors or something else in order to use any fund, then a grant writer is useless. You're winning money for what purpose? So until we have the structures across departments or within a natural resources field alone, then I don't know what we're looking for here. Leah and I are I hate to say it, and I have two other things to get to pretty quickly after this, we're maxed out. I don't know how better I could put that. You know, we're both technically on 40 hours, and most weeks we go way over that. So, or at least I do. I know Leah does occasionally too, and we both have small kids, all that kind of stuff. But fact is, we're always putting in maximum effort. And I don't know where we can add another project if we were successful with another grant. The downside is if we win a grant and we can't have people to implement it, we have to give that money back. And then when we go back to that same grant organization again in the future looking for more money, they'll say, why would we give you money if you've already not been able to spend it once? So what's the functional capability of the staff is a better question than the blind need for a grant writer. I know it's a blunt and horrible thing to say, but please realize that it's just two of us. I want to make one other thing clear. There is also a constant need to get every project done ASAP. We see people coming from Madikit, the Bram Point area, Sconset, and they want every project done immediately. There's also a Gantt chart in the CRP that shows a very long time frame for implementation. It's needs-based. Look at the priority 1 list. Let the priority 2s and priority 3s for a little later, unless you find a desperate need to increase it to a priority 1 for a traffic flood or erosion event. So look at your priority 1s first. Look at the timeline for implementation. Money is always needed. There is no question there. But look at what we're able to get done in a reasonable amount of time, because I'm not going to risk a nervous breakdown, and I don't want Leah to have to do either. Thank you.
Thanks, Vincent. Go ahead, Gary.
But Vince, we do think you are Superman, and unfortunately, that is what is needed in today's world. I had a couple of thoughts. First, I think that we ought to take a look at this list. As Matt suggested, there were some of these things that are unrealistic, or they were already marked for other projects. And so we might need to at least take a few items off this list. The other thought I had, a second thought I had, is that, as Vince said, to me, the most important thing we should be doing continually is looking at our list of priorities. And we're not succeeding so far in moving that list quickly enough. And so we should take a look at the list of priorities and say, okay, what is it that we can possibly get done on our list, starting with number 1 priority and 2 and 3 and 4. And then take a look and see if some of the items here might be candidates for dealing with the funding of these priorities, which we might be willing to tackle. My third question or issue relates to the word betterments here. My understanding, and betterment certainly is appropriate where certain communities on the island are going to get a betterment or get some value from the investments that the town might have to make or that we make. But in addition to those kind of projects, we have some island-wide projects where it wouldn't really be betterments because they're really important. Maybe Washington Street is one of those. If we don't fix the relationship between the ferry and Washington Street, there won't be any supplies coming on island in 10 years. So with respect to betterments, those are certainly appropriate where a community is going to be getting the benefit of it. But we do have a handful of projects on a priority list where it's really kind of island-wide. And that, I guess, doesn't really lend itself to betterments. Now, to the extent that, this is a question for our council, to the extent that we have projects where the betterments might be appropriate, does that have to go to town meeting in each case? That's a question.
Okay.
Yes, I'd be happy to answer that question. So, as you know, last year there was a special act and I believe a bylaw that was proposed specifically for betterments for coastal resiliency projects. I don't believe it passed last year, but it's coming back again. But, you can do a lot with a special act. If you don't have a special act, essentially you go to town meeting, you authorize a borrowing for a particular project, and then you authorize a betterment, all as part of that town meeting vote. But if I could, Mr. Chair, I really want to get, now that I've heard some of the concerns, I would like to sort of frame this and give you some things to think about.
Yes, please.
So, the yearly appropriation as part of the budget is great if you have administrative costs, whether you need to hire more staff, whether you need to have some studies performed or really pre-project engineering, what I would call it. That's a good use of that yearly appropriation. But given the numbers that you're talking about, if you're looking to create a sustainable funding source, I would encourage you to think about a couple of options. One would be you could do what the Affordable Housing Trust did and raise and appropriate. They raised and appropriated at town meeting 6.5 million contingent on an override. And so that money recurs every year and is available for expenditure by really the approval of the select board to the Affordable Housing Trust. You could do something similar for coastal resiliency. After I totally agree, your decisions on financing need to be driven by a long-term financial plan. What are the projects? What's the priority? When are you going to need the money? And put something together that will achieve that goal. I would encourage you to think about another option, which is the establishment of an enterprise, not an enterprise fund, excuse me, a stabilization fund. That is, you create the stabilization fund, you decide how much money you want to basically raise and appropriate each year into that stabilization fund, and you make that vote contingent on a Proposition 2.5 override. There's a whole process in the general laws that allow you to do that. Assuming it passes, it would need it may only need a majority vote at town meeting because there've been some changes in the law, and then a ballot question. If you do that, that money gets permanently baked into your levy, and and the select board decides each year whether to raise that amount by 2.5% or something less. That money will build up and build up and build up in your stabilization fund. And to expend it, you will need a town meeting vote to appropriate that for your specific coastal resiliency projects. Do you have on your list of projects, do you have projects that could be characterized as water, wastewater, or stormwater infrastructure? Is that part of any of your plans? Replacing sewers or whatever due to coastal resiliency issues? Because
Not this department.
Wait, go ahead.
So within the coastal resilience plan, there's no like structural stuff as far as stormwater, but
Okay.
more an island-wide stormwater plan. Stormwater is through the sewer department.
Because what I was going to say is that the town has from time to time considered another funding mechanism, which is a permanently available. It is called a water infrastructure investment fund. And the money is, once it's established by a vote of town meeting and a ballot question, you raise up to 3% of your tax levy. It goes into this dedicated fund, and it needs to be appropriated by town meeting for water, wastewater, or stormwater infrastructure. So I don't know if that's available. From the way you're describing this, I would think establishing a stabilization fund with a specific amount of money contingent on an override might be something you want to look at very seriously as a permanent funding source going forward. And then, so you would have the combination of your regular budget, operating budget amounts, and then you would have this permanent dedicated funding source. The beauty of that is it can all be done locally. You don't need to go to the legislature for special legislation. And I would, at least at this point, strongly encourage you not to look at anything that requires special legislation, just because of the sheer number of special acts the town submits, the difficulty getting them passed. Whether it's the Water Infrastructure Investment Fund or a stabilization fund supported by an override, those are things you can do locally. It requires town meeting vote. And then, of course, does everyone understand how Proposition 2.5 works? I'm just not sure whether everyone is aware of how that works. Would you like me to give a quick explanation?
Sure.
So, for your purposes, there were really, there are 3 different kinds of overrides that you can consider. One would be something like what the Affordable Housing Trust did, a raise and appropriate of a specific amount of money. And then that, as I said, gets baked into your levy each year and is available for expenditure in future years. For major projects, though, you're probably looking at a debt exclusion, which means that rather than a permanent increase in your levy limit, the additional amount is only raised for the life of the borrowing. So if you borrow for 20 years, once you've paid off those bonds, excuse me, I have to go in the other room. Once you pay off those bonds, the increase in the levy is eliminated and you go back to whatever your levy limit was pre-debt exclusion. But that's the way most of the major projects in town are funded, is through a borrowing authorization at town meeting funded by a debt exclusion ballot question. So, on this list, you talk about identifying fees that could be dedicated to coastal erosion. projects. The general rule in Massachusetts is any fees that are collected by the town go into the general fund, and they are available at a later date for appropriation once the amounts are certified by DOR. There are some exceptions to that general rule. One that I can think of is the community impact fee for short-term rentals. Again, that's a local option, and it's obviously not available for coastal resilience projects, but there are certain mechanisms. You can do revolving funds, which don't require special legislation. So, for example, maybe some of your beach fees could go into a special revolving fund. That has to be established by town meeting. Once it's established, however, the money can be expended by town administration for the purposes designated when the revolving fund is set up. So that's basically the landscape here. I do think, given the sheer amount of money that you need to raise, you might want to consider, you know, a special purpose stabilization fund supported by an override. And have you had Brian Turbot come in and talk to the committee yet? Has he given you any advice? Because obviously, whatever you come up with, you want to talk to Brian about the feasibility, how much money can be raised. You know, the problem with free cash and relying on free cash is that's an unknown number every year. And while free cash revenue has been pretty robust
Healthy.
in Nantucket, a lot of that's driven, I believe, by the short-term rental tax. And we don't really know if that's going to be sustainable at the levels that the town has received, let alone sort of the general economic conditions on the island and what predictions are being made in terms of those kinds of taxes and fees that ultimately, ultimately devolve to free cash. So that's a general outline. I would say look very carefully at, a one and done situation. You go to town meeting, you set up the fund, you get the override, and then you should be in pretty good shape to fund future projects.
Okay, John, one quick question before I go to the list of hands.
Yes.
But for Proposition 2.5, you approve it at town meeting, but then it doesn't have to be approved by the voters in the town elections?
No, if you authorize a borrowing, that occurs at town meeting, it's a 2/3 vote. It must be approved at the ballot before it takes effect. So that's an debt exclusion. An override is what the Affordable Housing Trust did. It's the same rule. It has to be approved at town meeting, the appropriation, and then it needs a majority ballot question. Also, and I didn't mention this, there's a third kind of Proposition 2.5 question, which is called a capital exclusion. And that's for, I think Brian mostly does that for equipment. So let's say you need a new front end loader and it's $400,000. You can raise and appropriate that money in a special, in the capital warrant article. It's contingent on a capital exclusion vote. If that passes at the ballot, then the levy limit is increased by that 400,000, but just for 1 year. So those are basically the three different mechanisms you have for Proposition 2.5.
Okay, one more question, or one more statement. I mean, if I would think we'd want to be able to get the money wherever it's coming from. And of course, we want to be transparent. We want the voters to know what what they're getting, but it's approved at town meeting, but then it can get shot down at the ballot. We're sort of leaving ourselves open and not getting the money. And
Well, the ballot question that is connected to, let's say, an override or a borrowing, you would have the town meeting vote at the May town meeting, and the corresponding ballot question would be at the annual election 2 weeks later. And if it doesn't pass, you don't have the funding at all.
right,
But given the numbers you're talking about, there's no way you're going to be able to raise this money without a Proposition 2.5, either debt exclusion or override, in my opinion.
okay, all right, thank you, Christie.
And avoid,
Wait,
I'm telling
hold
you,
on.
Sorry, and avoid special legislation unless it's absolutely necessary, because you're just going to get bogged down up in Boston on that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Go ahead, Christie.
Yeah, good stuff, John, right there. I was gonna ask Leah if this is kind of our master list, maybe to add those. But I had, at some point, the needs for coastal resiliency are going to start squeezing out, and it could be 30 years down the road, but we'll start squeezing out, other town funding projects. So I think that something on this list has got to work something out. And I like some of John's ideas. Peter, through you, I had a question for town council in that, John, what is the how is an account susceptible to the free cash rolling back in after the year, as opposed to an account that is able to accrue year after year? As Vince mentioned, the value of having the flexibility of having funds in this account is tremendous. And so I just want to make sure that, the coastal resiliency account that goes through town administration that we've been doing for the last few years, and I do see that even increasing in the next few years. I want to make sure that is, stable. It's not susceptible to rolling back in, for the flexibility of the department to do their work. And then my other question for you, John, is some of those recommendations that you had, are those also more stable funds, where those funds are in that account for perpetuity and basically not to roll back into a free cash?
Yes, well,
Go ahead, John.
Thank you. So answering your last question first, if you created a stabilization fund and have a dedicated revenue source, then that money stays in the stabilization fund. It is only available for the purposes of the stabilization fund, which in this case would be coastal resiliency projects. So that's in perpetuity, basically. If you appropriate free cash in a separate warrant article at town meeting, then that stays available for expenditure as a special article. And that can be expended at any time. It could be expended over, a multi-year period. If you have a line item in the town's operating budget, Article 10, that has to be expended in the year in which it's appropriated, unless the finance department at the end of the fiscal year places encumbers the funds. And if they encumber the funds, let's say, for example, to support contracts that were signed, maybe a consulting contract that's signed on May 1st, then Brian can encumber those funds to pay for the cost of that consultant. Otherwise, though, if they're not encumbered on June, well, by actually July 15th, they would revert to free cash, which would
Yeah, got it.
only be expended in the following fall once DOR certifies your free cash.
Thank you.
Okay, Joanna? Thanks, John.
Yeah.
You good, Joanna?
Sorry, I
okay.
have a question. So first, for Vince, I just want to clarify that I am not suggesting in any way that we should, the grant piece without the management piece. I fully understand that. And so my question is, for this next budget season, my question to you is, did you add staff in your budget? Have you added staff in your budget?
Did you get that, Leah?
Is she asking me or Vince? I thought she said
You.
I'm asking either of you.
Yeah.
not to my knowledge. Vince, is that correct?
Correct. We have not asked for staff, additional staff. We looked at the project implementation timeline as we have it. And for the number of projects that we have and the time available, we have enough staff. Now, we were going to need more staff over time, probably because things are going to change. But in the near term, for the low-hanging fruit projects and the next 3 to 5 years, as we see projects panning out, I don't see the additional need for staff. If you're trying to change timelines and bring things up faster and have more grants brought in, we're going to need more staff. But at the moment, we're doing fine.
Okay, but I think this goes directly to the issue of what is the strategy of this committee, right? So if we are, I support what you are saying about grants as they are tied to the execution of them and the need for support for the execution of them. But if we are talking about just the priority one list and the way in which that priority list has to be executed, and that there is a desire to have a portion of those, I believe there's 17 projects on that list. If there is a desire to have a third of those projects be funded by a grant from a federal or state agency, and we know that one, we need to hire someone to write the grant, and two, we need to hire someone to manage the grant, it would be great if we had a 3 to 5 year plan that this committee could look at and review around how that's going to be accomplished. Right? That would be my comment on that. And then with regard to some of the things that John is suggesting, the stabilization fund and the revolving fund, right? So John, this is a question for you. Is it too late for us to establish a revolving fund for FY26? Or is this something that the select board can authorize when they put in their articles?
The latter.
So it's not too late. It's not too late.
You'd have to
Okay.
get the select board to sponsor an article to amend your revolving fund general bylaw and to set the spending limit for the year. Stabilization fund is the same thing.
Okay, so I'm gonna just add something onto that, and then I want to just explain that to the group. So if let's just say, I'm just gonna pick the beach sticker project off this list, right? So say we decide as a group that one of our recommendations is going to be to increase the beach sticker price by $25, starting FY26, and we want the money from that beach sticker to go into, is it a revolving fund or is it a stabilization fund? Which would be better? Because this is an actionable item that this committee can recommend and act on immediately. And while it's $25 per beach sticker, we would have this fee for 100 years. And this would be a way for us to self-sustain some of these activities. Like, we don't have a funding mechanism that exists to fund anything. So I really want us to have something that is actionable in the near term so we can move the needle in some capability. So I guess, John, the question for you is, would you recommend that be a stabilization fund or a revolving fund? And if we can do it this year, then this committee can generate a letter to the select board and ask them to do this. And we could do that in time for the FY26 budget.
So, Joanna, the revolving fund,
Yeah.
once you identify the fees, they go into that revolving fund. Each year, I'm sorry, town meeting has to set the spending limit, but that doesn't affect the fact that any revenue that is going into that revolving fund will stay as a revolving fund.
So then
As
it's better as stabilization.
long as, yeah, as long as the there's no limitation on carrying it over from year to year. How much revenue would you generate by a $25 increase in the fee?
I mean, I'm making this up, right? Right. So I just use that as a round number. Maybe it would be 50. And let's assume, say we set, I'm going to make these numbers up. If we sold 1,000 beach stickers a year and we were able to collect $50 from each beach sticker, that would be $50,000, right? And right now it is at least, what I'm trying to propose to the group is that we need to take an action that creates money. And for right now, if the money is $50,000 a year, it's still better than no money. And if we create a stabilization fund for the money, then we have at least taken some steps to create a depository for any money we could future develop, right? And so even if you go ahead, John.
So I would encourage you to think about a revolving fund to cover sort of yearly costs of, of maintaining the program. It's more of an operational thing. You could establish the revolving fund. You could have 50,000 going into it, and you could authorize that it be expended for coastal resiliency, operating expenses, and capital. You could do that. But that is not a substitute for the special purpose stabilization fund, because the other option you could do is create a special purpose stabilization fund and vote to dedicate a portion, all or a portion of fees that are collected by the town. You saw that with I believe you've seen that with this the marijuana tax, the short-term rental tax. You could certainly dedicate 50% of the beach fees. I'd have to double check the statute because there are a few things that are excluded from that. But you could certainly have that money flow into the stabilization fund. But in addition, you need to think long-term. You need to think more boldly in terms of raising money. And that's why I'm suggesting that you might want to consider an override associated with creating a stabilization fund and essentially do both.
Yeah. Yep.
This is not in lieu of your annual budget allocation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of which, so you could do all of those things.
Okay. I mean, I'm now, Peter, speaking to the rest of the committee, like these are good ideas, and some of them are achievable this year immediately. If we can get letters to the select board and ask for the support, which I think we could do, I think that an override for the stabilization fund, I'm not sure we have a long enough runway to promote that and have people understand what that is. But asking the select board to create these things and to have John look into the 50% of the beach fees going to a stabilization fund and to recommend that we increase the price of beach stickers, these are real and actionable items and things that we can do. And we can create, what we haven't been able to do as a committee is create momentum around finding financial structures that will allow us to pay for the bill. And I feel like if we take some small steps and set this up in the way that John is recommending, we're out of the gate, right? Like I really would support that we work on this.
May I ask
Now,
a question, please?
Okay, hold on. Well, Joanna is still hot. Well, theoretically, if we all agreed this was the way to go, would you be able to write such a letter since you have
Yes,
the financial head?
yes,
And I know I
can
could
write,
wordsmith it, but you have the
yes,
brains for it. So
yes,
just, okay, good. All right.
yeah.
Leah, go ahead, and then I'll go to Gary and Christy, but I need to say that we're an hour over. And so we have an hour to go and a couple other items. So just keep that in mind. Go ahead, Leah.
Thanks, Peter. A couple things. So as far as the beach sticker goes, I know that that is already allocated to another fund, like to fund other things. So that needs to be looked into. If you're increasing the amount, then potentially that increased amount could then go into the funding that Joanna and John are talking about. John, for the knowledge of the committee, can you go through this bulleted list and say which one needs special act and which ones don't?
Okay, the first one, a constant sustainable fee, like the land bank fee. Well, you could certainly, you don't necessarily need special legislation for that. You could do the revolving fund, right? You could do a special purpose stabilization fund and dedicate a fee to that fund. That's not a lot of money, though. If you're talking about going big like the land bank did, it's special legislation most likely. We've talked about stabilization funding. That doesn't need special legislation. It needs a town meeting vote and an override. Beach stickers we've talked about. That would be a vote of town meeting to amend the bylaw to go into a revolving fund. A box for applicants to check off donated money. I believe that needs a town meeting vote. It may need special legislation, however, we'd have to take a look at that. Betterments can be approved without without the need for special legislation unless you're going, and I believe you are going in the route of creating a coastal resiliency district. And so that I think is going to be refiled, that special act, if I'm understanding what I've seen come across my inbox.
I can clarify that if it helps.
Sorry?
I can clarify that through the chair if it helps.
Okay.
If you can clarify that after he's done, then so we, in the interest of time. Go
A
ahead, John.
resiliency fund with the community foundation, that would essentially be a grant from the community foundation that would come back to the town for specific projects that can be created through acceptance by the select board. It does not require either town meeting or a special act. I don't know what leverage, and I don't know what public-private partnerships are. And I'm not being facetious. That term is used quite a bit. But if you're talking about getting private equity to help, that can all be done through a gift fund.
John, more likely we're talking about, community foundation. We're talking about Remain Nantucket, any organization that would like to help us out because it's in their interest to help Nantucket out, things like that.
I would look at that as a gifts or grants which can be accepted by the select board. Exploring increasing the embarkation fee. That's been not exactly controversial, but that's something you would have to work with all the other towns that receive the embarkation fee, which is not just Nantucket, it's Barnstable. It's also the Martha's Vineyard towns. There has been some talk of increasing that fee, but that would require special legislation. And I know that the current fee that is collected, I think is pretty much already spoken for. So I think it would probably have to be done in the context of an increase in the fee, so we're talking legislation at the state level. Exploring increasing tax by a small amount to fund projects. So this could be done either using the Affordable Housing Trust model, the 6.5 million, or again, a special purpose stabilization fund supported by an override. Selling excess sand, well, I'm not sure how that would work. Any revenue generated by the sale of resources like that would go into the general fund unless you set up some kind of a special fund, which may require special legislation. How to use Chapter 91 license fees and fines for coastal resiliency projects. Chapter 91 fees are set by statute. And again, if you wanted to allocate those towards specific projects rather than the general fund, we'd have to figure out a way to do that. I don't know if that's the kind of fee that can be dedicated to a special purpose stabilization fund by a town meeting vote, but we can certainly look into that. And I think we've talked about the shifting the beach fund allocation, either to a revolving fund or again, dedicate that fee to a special purpose stabilization fund.
All right. Thank you very much, John.
Yep.
Vince, go ahead. Then I'll go to Leah. Then we're going to wrap this up after. I see you, Gary, and I see you,
I've
Christine.
been here longer than everybody else waiting.
Okay. Well, I'm looking for clarification from Vincent, and then we'll go to you. Okay.
Okay.
Go, Vince. Vince.
Thank you, Peter. And to clarify for John and everyone, the coastal resilience districts, we went in as 2 articles last year, a bylaw and a home rule petition. The bylaw passed, the home rule petition didn't. They were very similar in nature. The home rule petition had more power behind it for the betterments section in it. So we have the bylaw section that we're developing up for the one that passed. So that is working its way into an active life. We're still a few months away, several months away from getting this into an implementation phase. It's primarily a mapping question at the moment, and we're working our way through it. So the other thing John said is also correct. We are putting the home rule petition back in for next May's town meeting, and I'm going to be asking the committee for lots and lots of support on that, please. I just want to quickly go over 2 other things that John was talking about, the public-private partnership. There's many models to that. One of the ones that we're pursuing most actively at the moment is using something like the Baxter Road model, where it's primarily funded by the private sector or private interest, homeowner groups, neighbor groups, but there's many other aspects to it too, if we even get involved with other nonprofits or other organizations. Then talking about the selling sand, John, just so that you know, that's related to a dredge plan that the town is developing. And exactly to Sarah's point, the initial purpose in this is to use the recovered sand from any dredging for beach nourishment, because there's several projects that need that. And Sarah's 100% right. Priority is for the existing coastal resilience plan projects. If there ever was an excess and that we didn't need to put on a beach and we needed to get it off a site, there's the possibility we could sell it, but that is not the priority or the plan that we're seeking to follow. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Vince. Go ahead, Gary.
Thanks, Peter. John, I just have a quick question. I like your idea about the stabilization fund, but there was at one point, if it is approved at the annual town meeting, and if it's approved at the ballot box, we then have a stabilization fund. The question is, I thought you said that if we have to then actually use the money, we have to go back to town meeting again. Is that true or not true?
That's true.
Well,
Okay.
to me, that takes away all the flexibility, since we have a dysfunctional town meeting system. It takes away a lot of the flexibility, when I think about revolving fund, stuff like that, where the money's available through the town administration, but
Yeah, but you're not gonna get around town meeting, Gary, whether you're going for, uh, you know, an appropriation out of the stabilization fund. Because that's a special purpose stabilization fund, I believe it would only be a majority vote at town meeting. So that gives you more flexibility. But if you don't come up with a plan to raise large amounts of money, you're not going to get anywhere. So look at the stabilization fund as a possible way, alternative or supplement to funding major projects through a debt exclusion, which requires a 2/3 vote of town meeting.
Hmm.
And the Water Infrastructure Investment Fund is a majority vote at town meeting. So,
What's-
but there's no way you're going to avoid going back to town meeting on a project specific basis. That's just the way municipal government works.
sorry to hear it.
And
Thank you.
from that exchange between you, Gary, and you, John, that just underscores our efforts for public outreach and getting people on board. Since we can't avoid town meeting, what I think we can avoid is, uninformed voters, and we can't avoid people shooting us down. But that's going to take time. Go ahead, Christy.
Yeah, Peter, I'll be real quick. I just want to caution, I think if we're going to make an effort on any of these ideas or some of the ones that John has brought up, that town council's brought up, that we look at the more significant ones like betterments, which will be challenging, but I think in the end, that's one of the ways to go, and or a special purpose stabilization fund. I think if we start throwing in any money's good, I get it, but I think if we start putting in initially to start, some fundraising ideas with fees and fines, I think that we're gonna muddy it a little bit, and I'm worried that you will jeopardize getting one of those bigger funding options, because we already have some in place. So I would say we focus on the big ones. And then after that, once the community starts seeing real need, then we can start throwing in maybe, beach passes or fines, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Leah, you had your hand up.
Nope, that was for earlier. I'm all set.
Okay. So, okay, go ahead, John.
So one of the other things I just wanted to caution you about, and if Matt's still on the line, I'm sure he'll chime in if he wants to. But if you're looking at major expenditures of taxpayer money, let's just talk about creating this special purpose stabilization fund. You obviously need to look at, and perhaps Christy can confirm this as well, you need to look at what are this year's capital projects looking like? And what is the appetite at town meeting to have 2, 3, or 4 major expenses coming before the voters? So timing of these things is very important. And talking to finance and talking to the select board and town administration, I think is really important before you go ahead and say, gee, we want to create a $5 million special purpose stabilization fund this year. Just a thought. It needs to be thought out carefully and timed so that the impact on the tax rate is not going to be overwhelming.
All right. Thanks for that extra bit, John. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I had that. Thank you, John. I had for the intro. I had that on my list is the public is struggling. A lot of the public is struggling right now. Our taxes only go up 2.5%, but if your neighborhood doubled in values, your taxes go up substantially more than that. and a lot of people are feeling that. We have a, you know, a article at town meeting to take the money away from the housing, you know, so I'm not sure that'll be successful, but that's the tenor out there is, why are we paying for this? We can't afford it. So I think bringing something for this town meeting, like large, like a stabilization, et cetera, would be a mistake. But I do think we need to find something like that. The other thing is some of this we can do, like some of the value capture can be done via zoning. The link I sent everybody talked about transfer of development rights and, you know, allowing more in some areas, you know, more development if they actually did coastal resiliency stuff to protect themselves, or, you know, forming a fund so that people in areas that aren't subject to it could do more, but if they paid into a fund. So there was a bunch of different things in that document that need to be, you know, seen whether they're legal and gone through. We don't have time to do them today. And that has to be done in concert with the, you know, planning department and the finance department. So this is really a staff, you know, sort of function. And the other thing I wrote in all of this, the number one thing I think we have to do is work on staff capacity and get them, you know, make a plan for that. Because this is not just in this department, it's also roads and everything else can't get done. We have the money, we have the projects, and we don't have the people to get the work done. We don't even just to oversee it. Even if we hire someone else, we don't have the engineers and the staff to oversee the work. So I think that, you know, for coastal resiliency, if we stay on our lane, that is the most important thing, is what is the plan over the next few years so that we can benefit from a staff writer, a grant writer, benefit from, you know, add extra staff. And, you know, as we ramp up, like we're doing the low hanging fruit, when we start doing the tougher stuff, how are we going to do that? You know, that is where really some time could go in. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Okay. I kind of agree with Christie about maybe waiting on the smaller stuff that Joanna was talking about, but I'm wondering, our next meeting is January 14th. If we wait that long to decide on that, have we waited too long? Can anyone answer that question? Or we still have time to send a letter to get something rolling?
If I may,
Go ahead, John.
obviously that's a question for town administration. I don't know whether Matt knows the answer, but I think you're perilously close at that point to the select board finalizing and adopting the warrant. I don't know, someone should check what the anticipated date is, but it's generally towards, I believe, the third week in January when that occurs.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot of good ideas flying around in this particular segment of the meeting, but I'm not sure we're ready to do something. And even if a letter is written, we won't get a chance to review it until January 14th, because that's our next meeting. So, do you have anything to add, Leah?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think the committee should take what Matt just said, and what Mr. Giorgio said as well, that there's a lot of competing capital projects that are for this year. And if the home rule petition for coastal resilience districts is moving forward, there's that too. And so if you're asking for a stabilization fund as well, I think that's going to kind of muddy the water. I think that the committee needs to think more about this and talk to town administration and the finance department before any letters written or recommendations put forth. So in my opinion, I think that you should wait and it should not go for this town meeting.
Okay, thank you. Is that something, does that make sense to the committee? You can just nod your head. We don't have to do roll call. I'm just trying to get a sense of it. This agenda item was information pretty much for us to get us up to speed, to get us thinking in that financial vein. So, okay, Gary.
Peter, if we conclude that it's probably too much to do a major thing like that. Maybe we ought to think about what Joanna has suggested, is to do something small, which won't compete against some of the major projects, but at least shows that we want the town to be thinking about starting to raise funds in some fashion for coastal resilience in a smaller amount than a stabilization fund.
Okay, I guess I kind of agree with that, but I still think checking in with town administration beforehand, before writing a letter, would be a good idea, which puts us into January, but not in danger of missing any deadline for town meeting. Go ahead, Joanna.
You know, I think that checking in with the town administration is a great idea. And I definitely think that should happen. And if that could happen between now and the end of the year or our next meeting, that's fine. It would be a very tight timeline around the 14th. But my concern is that if we do nothing, we're going to be here next December and we will still have nothing, right? And so, first of all, John and Matt are correct and Christy is correct. We're never going to get a large stabilization fund this year. There's the old R Island home is on the thing. There's on the voting block here, and there's a lot of other CapEx projects. But what we don't have is awareness and momentum about moving anything into the pipeline. Right? We have our $1 million that we'll get, but that money is just never going to make a dent in the amount of work that we have to do. And so I do feel like trying to start and have something is better than having nothing, because we're looking then at another year of having no funding mechanism. And we can have a revolving fund and the money going into it can be small for now, but it can always increase. And the same thing with the stabilization fund. We have to start the process of getting them. Now, that is without saying that the town administration should absolutely weigh in on this.
So are you advocating for yourself writing a letter now before the 14th?
I mean, essentially, I think two things can happen at the same time. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, right? I just think that we should try, right?
Okay, so we, like you said, we don't have a meeting until the 14th. So what you would write, we would review on the 14th.
Yes. Yes. But with some input in the short term. I mean, certainly I can work with Leah and Vince on whatever feedback they get. And if their feedback is, that this is not going to fly, then fine, we don't have to proceed. But if the feedback is, okay, we're open to that, then we can be ready to take an action.
Hopefully you have enough eggnog for the journey. That's good. Vince, okay, it sounds like we might be taking a vote in a minute, but Vince, go ahead.
Thank you. Just to clarify what Joanna's saying, it's not that we don't have any money. We have two funding mechanisms, not one. There's the $1 million a year, which is a force multiplier, and we have used to great effect to outdo its own value. That's the whole point here. Then we have also got the Coastal Resilience Districts bylaw that passed, that it can be used for benefits, like Matt said, and just like what we're planning for Baxter Road. So we're already doing a lot, but please understand another big thing that we have to do. It's something I used to say at the start of the Coastal Resilience stuff 4 or 5 years ago that I'm gonna have to say again: walk before you can run. We're gonna have to show successes. We're already showing lots of successes. Roughly speaking, for every grant you get, you can roughly expect to get 1 in every 5 or 6. We're hitting 1 in every 3. We're already way outdoing our own, abilities in some way. We're showing huge success, but you have to show lots of success before we can get into the big money leagues that the committee is interested in. Yes, it is the aspirational goal. Yes, we should be looking at it, but also, yes, this is more a conversation for next June, for when we start to look at next year's finances and what projects to put forward. And it will be probably more appropriate for the committee to look at, all right, we've already done a vote on one priority, one project. That was 3.5 years ago. can we have another vote on what the next priority project is for us to start looking at from the priority one list, please? So to actually look for the next big thing. Leah has done terrific work on getting 2 parts of the downtown neighborhood flood barrier underway. Look at the successes, look at the track record, look at the capability over time, and look at what we've already achieved. There's a lot to do, correct, but we have a long timeline to do it in. Please don't ask for too much too quickly. Thanks, Peter.
Okay, Vince, one question. How much money do we have stuffed in the mattress right now?
Well, everyone wants to know how much is available, and I don't have a number, but we have...
roughly.
I have no idea. Leah, do you have a number? I don't.
I would have to double check, but I think it's around 2 million.
Okay, that's good to know.
But the thing is, that's great to have that for matching grants for when they come up. And again, back to the fact that it's just 2 of us, and people keep talking about wanting federal grants. If you want federal grants, you're going to need like a team of 6 or 8 people in order to manage a big federal grant. We're not there yet.
Well, all the more reason to, go with Joanna's idea with, so it's not nothing. It's something we're putting in and we're moving forward, and then we can go and swing at the, swing at the big ones next year. But I don't know. Okay, well, Rachel, you have something to say?
Hi, Peter. Thank you so much. I just wanted to, I've been listening, and this is a fantastic conversation. So I really appreciate everyone's time and thoughts. And I just really wanted to second what Vince just said. I think all these ideas are incredible, and I recognize what Joanna's saying about, if we don't move forward, how are we going to move forward? Because there's a lot of talk and maybe not so much action. But at the same time, I just wanted to support Vince and Leah for 1 second, because I am a little bit in the town realm, and I just see how busy everyone is and how hard they're working. And I think the flip side of what we're discussing is that the one beautiful part we have here is, the endless amounts of permitting that are necessary for all of these projects. So there's, a little bit of a delay in funding no matter what. And I just think it's important to, look at these ideas and think them through thoroughly and make realistic timeframes in terms of pushing them forward, versus, trying to rush too far ahead with something. I think about actually getting to town administration before the end of the year, and I just don't think that's actually even feasible. So I just want to support Vince and Leah, knowing that they're doing everything they can do. And I think all of this is great, but I think it's okay to do it in a realistic time frame that works for the town and works for everyone. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Rachel. Anything else, Joanna, or is your hand up there? Okay. So I don't want to rule anything out. So I guess I would ask for a motion to have Joanna write that letter. If I don't get a motion, I guess I know how you all feel. And then we could look at it in January 14th. But does anyone think we should do that? And if so, give me a motion and we'll go from there.
Peter?
Christy?
I just have a quick question. One of my, things on the list that I really, agree with eventually is betterments. And I do, it is very complex. I think that, and I'm just wondering, where does that lie? Like, how do betterments start? And is it this? I can't imagine it's this advisory committee's work to come up with betterments, but how would that look? Like, how does that start? Where does the genesis come from as far as the structure of it? How can we help? So anyway, I just had a question about it. I think it's something that, as we get into it, we don't wait for when we needed it a few years ago, we start sooner than later. Thank you.
Peter,
So,
I can.
yeah, just a minute, Vince. So Christy, we're not going to create those betterments. We're certainly going to advise on them for sure. Since
Yep.
the select board came to us and asked, can you guys vet this and come up with a basic structure? What do you think? And then we gave it back to them and they ran with it. You know, a lot of it's going to fall on the guy down in the left-hand corner in Hollywood Squares. And, you know, and the select board, and maybe even town council. So, but we're going to be asked for our opinion along the way.
Yeah.
We're going to work with them, but we're certainly not going to, you know, draw the map, come up with the money.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Understood.
Go ahead, Vince.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to ask John for a little bit of help on this, but essentially, and just to go in a very simplistic way of looking at betterments, you basically have to have a designed project and a funded project before you can get into the betterments conversation. So you have to go through the full set of like project initiation, project development, project design, have all of the neighbors involved throughout so that they understand what they're getting into. You have to have the project fully designed. You have to get the approvals. Say if you're doing it in a wetland area, you're going to have to go to Concom and about a half dozen other regulatory organizations, get all of your approvals. You're probably then going to have to go to town meeting to get the construction funding. Then town meeting approves it, imagine. Then the betterment gets charged back so that the people in the betterments area pay a certain agreed upon amount, and that takes a long time to go through. John can attest to that, so that you can then have those people paying the betterments. And it will never just be the beneficiaries alone. The town will have to have some interest. So I don't know, a public road, a car park, a public beach access point, public beach itself, so that the town will also end up owning a portion of the project for the sake of wanting a better description. I'm going to just make up a number, 10% to the town, 90% to the property owner, so that the town does have an interest in having the project done in the first place. But, you know, that's also a percentage that gets negotiated through in the development of the betterment area. You're also frequently going to have maps for everyone in the betterment area. That's the mapped district for everyone that's in the benefit area. Everyone, say if it's a road or some kind of linear infrastructure, the people at the end might have a slightly higher benefit than the people closer to the beginning point, for the sake of argument. So, you know, you end up breaking it down. What's the word again? Per John, not per diem, prorated. So you end up having a set fee per property. It might depend on the square footage of the property. It might depend on how much frontage of the property might be. But again, all of those are negotiated points, and they take a very long time to go through. Did I miss anything in that, John?
No, I think that's quite accurate. Thank you, Vince.
Thanks, Vince.
Okay.
It can be a combination of obviously betterments and other town funds.
Yeah.
Which would be the 10% versus 90% that you're speaking of, I believe.
Okay.
I did miss
So-
one thing, Peter.
What?
I did miss one thing, sorry. And
Okay.
it takes a lot of time and a long time to negotiate. It takes a lot of legal time too, and a lot of staff time. I mean, it's hard to explain how much staff time and how much it goes into it. And I'm working on a version of this at the moment, in the northern part of my favorite place, Baxter Road. And I could spend, it's hard to describe how much has gone into putting this structure in place, and we're only at the design phase.
And so what I hear you saying, Vince, is that a betterment is not, the CRD created for a specific area is not something that happens overnight at a select board meeting. It takes a long time. It's not something to fear when it doesn't exist yet.
Correct and right. And the other thing that it does is it gives surety. So you can have some surety or some understanding that there might be still a risk, but your property will last longer. You'll get to maintain your property. You'll have services going to your property, and that you're paying for something that is a benefit to you, but also a benefit to the community in some way, which is why the town has to have an interest.
So not to make this conversation go any longer, but do you think looking around the island, there are places where it doesn't make sense to have a betterment because by the time the betterment is put into place, because of rising sea level, it's not worth it to protect something that you know is going to go or is pretty close to going. So in other words, the betterment better be land based. It can't be in a place where it's coastal storm flowage, or land under the ocean, or land that's going to be under the ocean. You got to pick those betterments correctly. It's got to be a place that's worth saving.
That's a bigger question, and that's down to a risk assessment. So the risk assessment at the beginning of the project would tell you if it's worthwhile or not. And you'd have to talk to a lot of regulatory bodies along the way to find out if it's worthwhile or not, financially and in terms of longevity. They're bigger risk type questions. But I would say in a different way, you also have to look at it in kind of two levels. And this is something that the Coastal Resilience District did. And that's one of the kind of differences between the bylaw and the Home Rule petition. The Home Rule, so the bylaw, there's the kind of local level project. I'm thinking, for the sake of argument, Baxter Road, Madikit, Brant Point are all ideal areas for local projects where majority is paid by the homeowner groups or those who benefit. But then there's bigger projects, island-wide projects, that have a different breakout in the, say, for the sake of argument, how it's written in the Home Rule petition, that is a bigger project that wouldn't necessarily be borne by the neighbor groups because it benefits the whole island. Think of, for the sake of argument, Easy Street or Washington Street. They're main thoroughfare access roads and they're bigger roads. So the benefit is to the entire public, to the entire island, not just a small homeowner group. So then that's the majority money, or that maybe the entirety, who knows, we're trying to figure this out, goes into a different funding stream, but not the homeowners, because it's got too much of a big benefit island wide. So you have to think of it more in terms of local benefit versus island wide benefit.
Okay. Thank you, Vince. So in case anyone was wondering, I let this conversation go on because I think we all needed to hear this. And then we were, over the last, several months, we've been wondering about all this. So I think, given that there's not another meeting until the 14th of January, we needed to have this conversation. And I know there are other things on the agenda that require attention. I also know that we might not all have done our homework for number 7. Anyway, those are things I was thinking while I was letting everybody talk, because we needed to talk it through. So thanks for your patience. And but my request stands. Is there a motion to have Joanna write the letter that we've been talking about, just for the sake of seeing what it is and where we might go with it after the 14th of January?
So moved.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Roll call vote. Christy?
Aye.
Jen?
Aye.
Gary? You there, Gary?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Doug? Oh, you already seconded. Okay. Rachel?
Aye.
Tim?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Okay, Rachel. Okay, Joanna. You know what you got to do.
Yep. I got it.
Thanks, Joanna.
No problem.
Okay, so I don't know if we get done with it. We'll move on to number 7. Refine the list with suggestions to update the zoning and land use regulations to incorporate coastal resiliency. discussion on using general bullet points or rating system, approval of final list for internal work group to use as a guide.
Peter, I was going to sign off unless you need me anymore.
We're that bad, huh? Okay.
Just trying to save the town some money.
Sure, John, go ahead. Thanks so much for your help. We really
You're very
appreciate you
welcome.
taking the time.
I don't talk to you. I hope you all have a happy holiday.
And
You as
John,
well.
Thank
John,
you.
I just
Bye-bye.
want to say that watching you at all these select board meetings, dealing with some of the crazies, you do a great job. Thank you for your help to our community. You really do
I'm
good
crazy
work.
myself, so no problem.
Rest,
Bye.
rest up, John. We've got we got warrant articles coming our way.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right, bye, John. Okay, so we got 15 minutes left. And I'm gonna just throw it out there. Can we push this to the 14th, Leah? Does that make sense?
Yes, I was going to suggest that this agenda item should be moved to the 14th.
Okay, are we all good with that? And you all think, help me, prop me up a bit, tell me it was a good idea to have this long financial discussion? You think we gained something from that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, I'm feeling better. Okay. Doug, did you have something to say?
Yeah, on both matters. Thanks, Peter. I agree, Peter, this is worth the time. I listened without speaking for the first time in many meetings. So, but I was really trying to absorb the collective wisdom of this group. And I think I heard things from almost every speaker that I agreed with. I think I landed honestly where Sarah started out, which is that I think the vast majority of the funding challenges that we will face are going to be project specific, and they will only unfold as we get closer and closer to these projects. And I was reassured to hear Leah say that we do have a fair amount of money stowed away to do the kinds of day to day, if we need a matching fund to apply for a grant. For the most part, it sounds like those kinds of funds are available and ready to go. So I guess I came out feeling pretty good about the collective feeling here. I also just want to appreciate Joanna because she's basically volunteering to take a whack at it and come up with an idea that appeals to her, makes sense to her, and then we can discuss it again in more detail at the next meeting. So anyway, I just want to say, yes, I think that was time well spent. Thank you, Peter. And the second thing I wanted to say while I'm babbling is I did spend a fair amount of time looking at the second agenda item, and I'll confess that I am certainly not a subject matter expert here. I think everything that Matt said made sense in his submission. We are not experts in the world of land use regulations. At least I'm not. I shouldn't speak for the rest of us. I know there's some that have a lot of background in that, but I don't. And I do believe that next agenda item, when we get to it at the next meeting, is going to continue to be sort of a learning process for all of us. And that I think CRAC's role in this is to act as an advocate, not to let status quo stay just because it's comfortable. Let's keep pushing and make sure that every regulatory body in the island is looking at coastal resilience with the same level of urgency that we do. Thanks.
Thanks, Doug. Tim?
Yeah, very briefly, I think I learned a ton from this meeting. I think you were wise to let it go on, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Okay, Gary.
With respect to the second item, which we're going to postpone to the next meeting, I think it's a real challenge for some of us, less involved in these technical issues to make sense out of all of these proposals. So, I mean, I look at a few of the suggestions people made and I said, if somebody can figure this out, I'll look it over, and if I like it looks okay to me, I can't add too much value by taking all of the possible considerations and change all of that stuff. This is really difficult for us. And I don't know if there's an easier way for either staff or someone to suggest which are the things that really can get going and go forward. Because, we couldn't look at 101 pages of you know, the regulations. And this is also pretty challenging for us to hone down everything and come up with the priorities like that. We need a little expertise, help on that.
Gary, I hear you. I would say you might surprise yourself. And, there's a lot of, well, I'll say it, there's a few laymen on this committee, and I think that everyone's opinion matters, and you shouldn't be intimidated by what you're seeing, and just offer up suggestions. You're not going to get laughed at, and no one's going to give you a hard time. It's not going to be that type of situation. We're an advisory committee. We're down at the grassroots level, advising the committees above us and the voters, and everything that you have to say counts. You always have something good to say, Gary. So,
Yeah.
what
to look at all of the possible regulatory changes that we might advocate and then come up with the priorities, to me, is what is most challenging.
Okay. Well, you have our help for
Okay.
sure. Go ahead, Leah.
Thanks, Peter. It seems like creating the priorities for the suggestions for updating the zoning bylaw seems daunting for the committee. So what I would suggest is just keep it as bullet points, and that list is going to be used as a roadmap for the internal work group, and that the internal work group can decide what is feasible and what is, the number one priority moving forward with it. So just look over the clean version of the list and see if those are the things that you want to put forth as a committee to the internal work group. The internal work group will then go through the list and see if any of it is possible. So that's my suggestion.
Yeah, they're going to do the hard work of it, Gary. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted, before we postpone that, to confirmation that there isn't a timeline to the first bullet of the adopting the Massachusetts floodplain bylaw, because we want to continue participation in that. So I didn't know if there was a timeline on that.
Sarah, there was a question and answer on that particular issue. And it's one of the ones that I asked. If you looked at the minutes, I asked the question, and our expert said it's not been passed into law yet. So we don't have a timeline. And that's why they were suggesting we look at that, at passing that in Nantucket in the annual town meeting in 26. It's not even law in Massachusetts yet. It's on the way, but it hasn't been finalized. I asked the same question.
Thanks, Gary.
I can
Right.
I can add a little to what Gary said too. Shannon said that needs to be adopted before the FEMA flood maps are updated. And she said that'll probably be in a couple years. So that's why Shannon said, wait until 2026 to start this process.
All right. Thank you, Leah. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I just responding to Gary's concerns. I kind of swim in the land use zoning pool on a regular basis, and reading through this stuff makes my head spin. So I appreciate where you're at. I think that there's a lot to work through, and I think we'll do it as a group. So I wouldn't worry too much.
Thanks. Yep, I think we all needed to hear that one. Is there anyone else? Okay, seeing no one else, we'll push this to the July 14th meeting in 2025. Number 8, discussion. Number 8, discussion about which local regulatory entity to incorporate coastal resiliency into next. And so I'm just throwing it out there. Where should we go after this, do you guys think? Leah?
Peter, I would suggest moving that to the January meeting as well, because it kind of goes to with number 7. Maybe the committee can take a couple of weeks to think about that.
Okay. You guys are good with that, right? Okay. New Business Committee and Natural Resources Department reports on Planning Board, Concom, SHAB, Select Board, Advisory Committee on Non-Voting Taxpayers, and other committee members. Do you, any of our representatives, have reports they want to share with us? Okay, Doug.
Yeah, I don't want to jump ahead of the line, but if no one else is going to have any updates, I just want to make a reminder note for Leah and for Vince. I think Vince was the one that mentioned several meetings ago that there is a state law apparently that relates to the discussion we were having around limiting town liability on development that's happening in at-risk areas. And I've tried to find it myself and I can't seem to track it down. So if there's a way, Vince or Leah, if you could provide that for us, I think that would be helpful. Just educational background for me, at least. Thanks.
Can you clarify? Peter,
Is that Vince?
can I clarify the point?
Okay.
Was that about the state tort law?
Through you, Peter. Honestly, Vince, I'm
Yep.
not sure. I know that we were having a fairly lengthy discussion about means by which the town might be able to limit its liability on any development that's happening in at-risk areas. And I think you had made the comment that there may be some risk to the town in pursuing that because it could be redundant or in conflict with some other state law. But I didn't know what that was about. Thanks.
Okay, I think this gets back to the question that I want to say Rick Atherton had many meetings ago, where he was trying to put forward a bylaw that was redundant because there's already a state tort law, which means that if it's not to, it's more an indemnification type thing, to be honest, Doug. So that if you have a building or do a development in a coastal area that floods or erodes, you can't sue the town. That's what it talks about. It's not, it doesn't stop the person doing it. It just means you can't sue the town.
Okay.
Right,
I'll
but
get more info on it.
Hold, do you have something to add to this, Matt?
yeah, just real quick, but
Okay.
there are items like we are required, if it's a town road, we're required to provide, you know, utilities, etc. And so that they might not be written in a specific thing, but there are certain, that's just one that I know of because we've dealt with it a couple times at Sheep Pond that are in conflict, that we, you know, part of what Rick Atherton would like to do, you know, and we should be doing, hopefully, again, if we don't own, is A, not own the road, be able to give the road up and not be responsible to spend millions of dollars putting a road in that's just going to disappear again anyway. So there is more than just the liability and paying for the, like Vince is right, but there's, we aren't liable on certain aspects, but the state still doesn't recognize that they've got a bunch of other rules that we have to comply with that make us liable in some other ways. So that's what we need to sort through, and we're not going to do that. Again, we can't do that on in a 2-hour meeting here. You know, that has to be delved into.
To get back to the original request, happy to provide more info to Doug.
Okay. Leah, go ahead.
Thanks, Peter. I just wanted to make a couple announcements. So as you all know, in mid-November, we had consecutive days of sunny day flooding down on Easy Street. So just for your knowledge, those were about 1 foot to 1.5 feet over the predicted mean higher high water. And so you can go onto the Nantucket tide gauge, the NOAA Nantucket tide gauge, and you can see those different predictions and the graphs and stuff. So just want to put that out there. In addition, Ava from Acclimate will be reaching out to all of you if she hasn't already. And I've worked with the communications office within the town to have these, you know, short interviews to be put on social media for outreach about the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. It's a pilot project, so it's just a one-time thing right now. And the process of that is that Ava will send you, I think it's 5 questions. You need to respond with written answers. And then I will get those answers together. They will go to the communications office for approval. If it's approved, then you will then conduct the interview. And that will be recorded by Ava. It'll be edited by her. And then go to myself and the communications office for approval before it gets put on social media. So your answers in the interview don't have to be verbatim, but you need to, talk about the things that you have written down. And please don't go rogue, because if you go rogue, then it may not be posted. So yeah, so just wanted to put that procedure out there. 2 more announcements. Tomorrow I will be on NPR, and from 9 to 10, we'll be talking about coastal resiliency on Nantucket. There'll be some other people around the Cape that do coastal resiliency stuff, and that show is called The Point, and it will be on local FM 90.1, 91.1, and 94.3. It'll then be rebroadcasted that night, tomorrow night from 7 to 8 p.m. if you can't listen in. And then they also archive it, so it'll be on their website. And then one more thing. So Mass DOT, they have a resilience improvement plan for the state. And I am submitting basically all of the roadway, bridge conversion, all of that stuff that's in the coastal resilience plan to Mass DOT for them to hopefully accept. And if it does get accepted, then it has better leverage for getting one of those federal protect grants. So stay tuned for that. That's all I've got.
Okay, great. Thanks, Leah. Go ahead, Christy.
Yeah, just really quickly, and maybe this is for Vince and Leah's benefit mostly, but as Capital Committee closes in on our, recommendations, we basically rate everything based on a formula, and everything plugs into a structure. And currently we have 4 projects with, natural resources and hazard mitigation. 4 look like they will pass. 4 look like they're kind of still to be discussed. This is not a final, but coastal resiliency is safe. Downtown flood barrier safe, and baseline environmental data program safe, and Brand Point Hatchery is safe. I will reach out to you guys separately in an email. I just need a little more information, and I think what's happening is, I think the committee finds sometimes with coastal resiliency funding that we give, there's a little bit of gray area. What is that funding, and why can't that fund some of these projects? So I'm going to send you a separate email, not to take up time here, and just follow up with that, because I do want maybe some other words of encouragement for the 2 Sacagawea projects, the dredge plan and the climate action plan. I think I'm working on some, wording for supporting the climate action plan, but, as we heard, we are, we're well over 200 million for capital projects this year, and we're really trying to take a good look at things. So that's a snapshot.
Excellent. Thanks, Christy. Okay. All right. So next meeting, January 14th, 2024. I guess that's it. And we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Okay. Moved and seconded. Roll call vote. Christy?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Jen?
Aye.
Gary?
Aye.
Rachel?
Aye.
Sarah?
Hi.
Doug?
Hi, good meeting. Thanks.
Tim?
Aye.
Okay, chair votes aye. Thank you everyone very much for indulging and just great conversation.
Thanks, Peter.
Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, Happy Festivus, Happy Winter Solstice. Happy rest of December. I hope you all get a chance to wind down.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Pete.
Okay.
You all.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.